Hi everyone. I'm about to begin a series and it'll be more informal. So this is about as informal as I ever get. And so we're not before the Blessed Sacrament in my chapel. And I'm not wearing my usual underclothes for teaching, which would be a black cassock with purple piping, for example. But rather, I'm just sort of sitting here in my informal street clothes. Not that that matters, but the reason it does is because I want to talk with you about something that, I don't know, oftentimes people have a problem hearing about in church. And it's true. I mean, you may say, really? You could say something that we don't like to hear about in church? Well, yeah, I'm going to have to do that today. And in this series, I'm actually going to be talking about subjects that often have meant that there are people who say something like, it's none of the church's business. I know you can't believe that, can you? But I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and then I'm going to take you to a part of the Book of Common Prayer, and you can pick whichever one you want. I mean, if you really like, I don't know, 1662, pull it out. If you like the 1789, pull it out. If you like the one from the 1890s or 1928 or 76 or 2019, your choice. You can have a little fun searching to see where you can find this tucked in. But pretty much it is in precisely the same language. And I guess we could say for all those who think of themselves as prayer book oriented, and then they have in their minds determined what that prayer book is, the one thing they would all agree upon is what is written here, not its intention necessarily, but certainly the fact that it just keeps on going from one prayer book to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. And it's all about wills. Well, as they say, where there is a will, there is a way. But I have to say to you that one of the problems we discover today is that there are Christians who don't have wills. Well, non-Christians too, but Christians. And here's why. Now, you may say, when you think about what the job of a priest is, you already in your mind maybe have figured out the points that are important to you. But imagine what it would be like if I, as a bishop, were sitting down with all of my priests and I told them that almost all of them had broken one of the things that's required of them. They had failed to do something that was required of them. Well, I think they would probably go through a checklist, and probably most of my priests at least would have said something like, Bishop, we'd never break anything. And if I said to them, okay, well, actually it's in the prayer book, then another one might say, seriously, you don't really think we'd break anything in the prayer book, do you? Okay, here it is, folks. Now, I'm doing this in the Book of Common Prayer 76/79. And my reason for doing that is because there are some who would say, well, you know, that's a modern prayer book. Okay, and that there are people who don't like to use it or think it's the only prayer book there is. I'm not here to talk prayer books, but I'm selecting this for you simply because I think it might be fun. So if you want to have a little fun and you have that version of the prayer book, you just have to go to page 445, and there it is. It says, the minister of the congregation. Now here, you have to understand that when you see a capital M minister, it's not saying that's a synonymous term with priest. Put a little differently, not all ministers are priests, but all priests are ministers, if that makes sense. So for example, I'm a bishop, so I'm a minister. So's a priest, so's a deacon. So if you see a capital M, that's the way of saying bishop, priest, deacon. And it says, therefore, of the congregation. Now, again, we have two major distinctions in our tradition. We have parishes and missions. But a congregation are the people who are gathered together. And you know what that means. that means that it's assumed that the bishop, priest, or deacon is talking to the assembly. That's what congregation means in this context. It doesn't mean that's a synonymous name for parish, because it's not. Because, you take a large parish that maybe has 3 masses on a Sunday, those are 3 separate congregations. Those are the people congregated at 8, at 9, at 11 in the parish. So with that as part of the definition, I want to go back here. The minister of the congregation is directed to instruct the people from time to time about the duty of Christian parents to make prudent provision for the well-being of their family and of all persons, to make wills while they are in health, arranging for the disposal of their temporal goods, not neglecting, if they are able, to leave bequests for religious and charitable uses. Whoa, what do you think about that one? That's, once again, page 445. A lot of people miss that, because my experience when I used this prayer book was that people didn't do Thanksgiving for birth of a child very often, I'm sorry to say. But there you have it. Now let's look over that one more time. It's saying that, for the sake of the teaching, the priest tells the people on a Sunday morning, hey, don't forget, everybody, you need to have a will. And the reason you have to have a will is because, first of all, it's a duty of Christians to have one, so that not only are you going to take care of the people who are dependent upon you, but also you won't forget that you're supposed to leave money for good purposes in the church and outside the church even. So that certain charitable things may very well be church related, but not the church. But remember the church in your will. That's really what's being said here. Now, why is this really important? Well, first of all, you have no idea how many people, perhaps you do, die without a will. And when people die without a will, it's like sending a letter to the state in which you live that says, I want you to understand that I have loved living in this state so very much that I'm going to leave you lots of money. How about that? Yeah. I don't know how many governors pick up their mail, look at it, woo, look, another bequest from a person. All that really means is a person died in what we call intestate. They died intestate, which means they died without a will. Now, first of all, I need to tell you why that's a bad idea not to have a will and to watch your money be dispersed elsewhere. Because the survivors then sit around looking for a will. The next thing they do is they want to figure out if they're mentioned in the will. And the third thing they want to know is who's making sure that I get what I should get. Well, you never use a will as a type of hammer or dangle it in front of people. If I like you, I'll give you more money. If you don't do things that I want, then I'll take you out of my will. I mean, that's just plain bad behavior. Bad behavior. So let's go and look at it from a better perspective. Okay, first of all, if you have a will, what you're doing is you are now saying that you should have a right to say how your assets, financial and otherwise, are going to be distributed. It's fairly simple, isn't it? You're able to say, it is my will that once all my bills have been paid, and make sure that none of my family has to pay my bills, well then, here's what I want to have next. And in your will, you get to talk about your family and dispersing funds and who gets what. And maybe you've even gone around the house and done what I think a lot of people ought to do, especially when they get to be my age. They ought to have a video done of walking around the house and saying something like, my dear granddaughter, every time you've come to our house, I've seen how much you love this painting. Well, I'm leaving that painting to you. And then take a sticky note, put it on the back of the painting and say, to my granddaughter so-and-so. Or it's Thanksgiving dinner and you're sitting around. And several of your grandchildren couldn't care less whether they had plastic plates or sporks for the Thanksgiving dinner. And besides, they like to take their turkey outside. But you have a grandchild who likes sitting at the table and says something like, "What beautiful china. Wow, what beautiful silver." Well, I mean, maybe that would be a nice gift, but how does anybody know that if you don't tell them what your will is for them? Okay, so let's summarize. Then I'm going to go on to the next point. Point number one is the church tells us that and it's actually every year it's understood, every year the priest is supposed to stand up and remind everybody on a regular Sunday morning, you need to have a will. Next thing, he's supposed to say something like, and since you're Christian parents, it's appropriate that you take care of your family, but there are other things that would really make a difference. Well, what's that? Well, here's the thing I can tell you. What I've noticed over my nearly 50 years of ordained ministry is that people used to leave a lot more money to the church than they do now. What I mean is, once upon a time, people were really big on leaving money to the church, but now we have more people leaving their money to their children. And one of the things you have to really think about is if you've raised your children and they now have good jobs, do you really think that your, $10,000 will vastly improve their life? Well, you know what? It might. So don't forget your children and grandchildren in your will. But I want you to think about your church right now. If the church opened an envelope and it had $10,000 in it because it came from the will of an active member, do you think $10,000 in the church would improve the church? Well, you better believe it would. So stop and think about it. What are some things you can do? You can just leave the money and you can say something. It goes to St. Swithin's to be used in any way they wish. Or you may say, I am establishing a scholarship fund in the name of so-and-so, and what's going to happen now is that at St. Swithin's, it means that graduating seniors will all receive a check for fill in the blank. Imagine what that would be like if suddenly all the graduating seniors in a parish church started receiving a check simply because somebody was generous enough to remember the graduating seniors. Or if, for example, here was the treasurer of the parish fretting over paying bills, the treasurer of the parish dies, somebody reads the treasurer's will, and the treasurer says, I don't want the next treasurer to fret over having to pay bills here at St. Swithin's, so I'm leaving $50,000 to St. Swithin's, and I want all the bills to be paid. Wow. Or somebody wants a memorial. Not a problem. The church will do what the church is asked to do. But I have to tell you, I'm going to use Texas here. If you live in the state of Texas and you die intestate and the state of Texas gets your money, I want you to know that no matter how much you love the church you attend, the state of Texas is not going to send a check to your church. Nor is it actually going to send a check to some charity that you've given to. So what does your will say? Well, for starters, there may be a couple people watching this who say, I've been wanting to get around to that, I just haven't gotten around to it. Let me let you in on a shocking principle here. You know that nice prayer that many of us children have said, now I lay me down to sleep, I pray the Lord my soul to keep, if I should die before I wake? Guess what? That is true. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. But there's no if with death. You do know that, right? I mean, nobody has ever been able successfully to live in the if part. So it is when I die. Now you, for this very moment, I want you to stop for a moment and think about this. Pretend for just a moment that somebody came into your house right now, today, and they say, I just want you to know that I'm going to be taking this, that, and the other, by the way, I need that, I want that, and I also want you to know I have your bank account. I know you wouldn't like that. That would be called theft, wouldn't it? Right? But that's what happens when you die without a will. Somebody else comes in and decides what happens to your things, including your money. And if you believe, really, all things come of thee, O Lord, and of thine own have we given thee, then I guess you ought to really be saying something like, if that's the case, how am I going to give that money back, those things that I have, that will mean something to somebody? So, maybe leaving $50,000 to your millionaire grandson is a nice idea. Maybe it is. But maybe you'd rather take that amount of money and you'd say, I want X percentage to go to St. Swithin's, X percentage to Nashotah House, the seminary that educated my priest or educated me, or X percent that would go to a particular charity or a missionary endeavor. Can you imagine? Do you think about this, if you gave $50,000 to a missionary society, do you think they would go and use it well to get more Christians? Yeah. If you left $50,000 to the state of New York, for example, because you died intestate, do you seriously think that the state of New York is going to take $50,000 of your funds and fund a missionary endeavor? Of course not. So this is very simple. Now, I understand a couple of you are probably saying something like, I don't have a will, I don't like attorneys, and I'm not going to make an appointment to see an attorney because it's going to cost me too much money, and besides, it's too difficult. All right, I get it. I do. But here's what I'm going to ask you to do today. I want you simply to get out a sheet of paper, and I want you to write down how you would like what's left over to be distributed. I mean, all the bills are paid off. I get it. I mean, that's why I see these signs sometimes on a camper that say on the back, I am spending my children's inheritance. You know, I get that. Why not enjoy it? In fact, I feel a little bit like that. I do certain things. My wife and I do certain things that will make our children and grandchildren happy. And I'd like to see them enjoy some of that. But I don't have any control over that. One day they're going to be sitting down, and I think my grandchildren won't say, we're sure sorry that Papa died, now show me the money. You know, I don't have any Jerry Maguires in my family. But there are some families where, in fact, that happens, was I remembered in the will. Let everybody know up front. No mystery. No mystery here. When I die, I'll give the family my house. Equal parts. One of you wants to live in it? Fine. You get to buy out the other ones and give them amount of money so that you can live in the house. Or maybe all the children get together and they say, you know, since Susie over here is single, doesn't have any children, and is currently unemployed, maybe it would be better for us to share X with Susie. Well, that's up to the family. But your will needs to be able to say what that looks like. You need to say that. Because if you want to have a serious problem in your family, if you think that you know some subjects which really destroy families, it's this subject. I guarantee that. When children start fighting over what they're going to do with mom and dad's things. So, you know, my grandparents, for example, my maternal grandparents, as some of you have heard the story, were killed by drunk drivers on the way home from my parents' wedding. Well, they were only 52 years old. They seriously weren't considering when they got in their car in McKeesport, Pennsylvania, and were driving to Cleveland, Ohio to drop off my great aunt and my cousins, that they were going to be killed by drunk drivers. No, they didn't know that. So life is so uncertain. You better write this down today. So get your sheet of paper out, okay? And get a folder. And then what I want you to do is just write down what you want to do. Things like, maybe you say, I don't know how much money I'm going to have, so write percentages. You can put something like 50% of my assets go to my children and my grandchildren to be equally distributed. Okay, 50% of my income is going to go for other usages. 15% is going to go to my parish church. 10% is going to go to Nashotah House Theological Seminary. 10% is going to go to the Union Gospel Mission in Fort Worth to take care of all the people who are homeless. 15% of my money is going to go to such and such a missionary society so that we can have more Christians coming. Now, of course, you recognize that you may die a pauper. All your money might be taken away in some other way. So maybe that means some of these people are only going to get $15 or $25. But guess what? At least you won't be seeing most of your money going to the state, and you won't have some court-appointed executor rather than having the executor you'd like to have. Who would be your executor? Do you have one? Who gets to decide? Don't you think sitting down with the executor and saying, you are my executor. Now I'm going to tell you the little things that are important, so pull out your pad. I want to make sure when you sit down with the grandchildren, I'll tell you exactly one. You may very well say, I want a college fund for my grandchildren. And then your executor gets to decide with the grandchildren the best way to use it. If you want to have that kind of a connection between the executor and his or her nieces and nephews or children, sometimes that can be a helpful thing to do. Now, finally, what it says here is that this is considered to be prudent. It says prudent provision. Have you noticed how we don't use the word prudent much anymore? Well, I want you to start using that word again. I want you to think about it. It would be prudent. It doesn't say here you'll be excommunicated if you don't do this. But sometimes the warnings that we are given by God and by the church are so that our families, including us, don't have to live with bad consequences. So there are creative ways to be able to handle a will. And I'm going to give you a couple thoughts here that I want you to consider. One, don't ever go and visit an attorney to make up a will unless you already have written down what's on your mind. Otherwise, you're going to waste the attorney's time, and then you're going to be constantly changing it anyway. So sit down today with that paper I told you about, write it. Okay, you say you already have a will, but you've changed your mind. Write it down. Write it down. Put it all down. You don't want people running around saying, I found a scrap of paper in Dad's Bible, and somebody said, yeah, I found a scrap of paper in his prayer book. Hey, it looks like it's his will and testament. Let's read it. Whoops. Oh, they're not the same. They're in conflict. Don't allow that to happen, folks. So write it all down. Make an appointment with an attorney. Okay, I have scared you out of your seats today. Okay. Then instead, go online and simply download, which you can do online, a sample will. Fill it out. Put in everything you want. Now you decide that you are still living next week. You discovered you're not dead. So then go see your attorney. And maybe you have this will already kind of up, filled in, provisional will. Say, this is what I want. What do you do next now that you have a will? Well, the next thing you do, you need copies. Who gets the copies of your will? Number one, very important, make sure that you don't just have a will stuck in your house somewhere. You'll never imagine what happens when there's a fire, right? So make sure that you have a will that is on file with your attorney, but make sure everybody in the family knows who your attorney is. Make sure that you have a copy of the will in a safe or a strong box in your house. Okay? I mean, it may go, but at least it's better off than just sticking in a file. And have you ever walked into a person's house, if you had to find somebody's important papers because they just died, would you know where to look? I mean, your own house. If you died tonight, would your family members be able to walk in and know where your will is, where your funeral plans are, so that you can have the funeral you want instead of what some funeral home decides you should have? I mean, do you have all that written down? Do you have it in a place where people know? Do you have anything that's marked that says important papers? Across from me right there, I won't bore you with it, but it says high priority important papers. Everything's in there that my children need to have. My will, bank accounts, life insurance, all of those kinds of things that people need to know need to be in one place. Now somebody says, okay, another place would be safe deposit box in a bank. Good idea, but it's a good idea also to tell people that you actually have a bank and a safe deposit box. You know what's happened to me? I've done the Requiem Mass, funeral's done, everything's all put together, and guess what happens next? You won't believe what happens next. And that is that, I'm sorry, that's my clock, it's a train. Maybe it's telling me that I need to get back on track. So let me get back on track. So you go to the safe deposit box in the bank may have it, but if people don't know that you have a bank and you have a safe deposit box, you'll be in a situation I've been where they've discovered it later and we find out that we did a funeral totally different from the one they wanted. It can be terribly difficult. Now let's go to the next one that goes along with this. And that is then you always file a copy with your parish church. Yeah, you should. It'll have your will and your burial plan, especially if the church is mentioned in it, so that there might be some cooperative venture here. Yeah, I know, you get upset with St. Swithin's, you transfer to St. Silas Church or something like that. I mean, I get it. But remember, you have to keep your will updated. You have to keep the dates on there. You have to let people know what the most recent will is. Very, very important. And then also, you need to have a copy with your executor. Maybe you have a child who's the executor. Tell the rest of the children that so that there's not any unhappiness there. So that they won't say, why did you select him or why did you select her? Explain it to them. It's part of the conversation. All right. So now what we've done is we have taken a will. You have it in front of you. Now the only thing left is for you to die, right? Well, no, I'm not wishing that you would die. But what I am saying is that you can at least die knowing that those many years of hard work that you've put in, the many things that you've been given over the years that belong to your mom, your dad, and to other people, all those things, you can rest assured that somebody is going to enjoy them and that you are improving somebody else's life. And if you have no children or grandchildren, well, folks, there are other possibilities. People have actually given their homes to their parish church and it's become the rectory. You know that? Because it was a nicer house than what the priest was living in. There are all sorts of creative things that you can do. Because remember this, I know, we in the English language say you can't take it with you. But I love what is in Hebrew that the Jewish people say. It's in Yiddish too. And it's saying, translates, there is no pocket in the shroud. There is no pocket in the shroud. Just another nice way of saying you can't take it with you. So how can you improve other people's life today? Because someday that's going to happen. Someday, I promise you that's going to happen. All right, well, there's a few thoughts on wills for you today. I'm going to conclude once again with reading from the prayer book that's been in all of our prayer books. The minister of the congregation is directed to instruct the people from time to time about the duty of Christian parents to make prudent provision for the well-being of their families and of all persons to make wills while they are in health. I like that one. Arranging for the disposal of their temporal goods, not neglecting if they are able to leave bequests for religious and charitable uses. Okay, folks. And if any priests, I see a bishop here, priests or bishops are watching this call today, hey, Trinity Sunday is this Sunday. Good time to be able to make this announcement, don't you think? A good time to make this announcement. And by the way, I don't have any here. Well, let's pretend this is it. But one year I handed out something like this to everybody in one of my churches. And I put T-U-I-T on it, T-U-I-T. And I told everybody this was a round to it. And everybody knows what a round to it is. It goes like this. I would have done that, but someday I will get around to it. I haven't done my will yet, but any day now I'll get around to it. And I've always wanted to sit down with my children and have this conversation. And one time in the future, I'm going to get around to it. Well, here it is, folks. Here's your round to it. Cash it in today. Cash it in. And now that you have a round to it, get around to it. Thanks, everybody. And I will next time be discussing with you something related. And I'm going to give you a hint. Want to know what it is? DNR. That's your hint. Next week, I'm going to talk about DNR. And that is related to wills. And maybe, if you think about it, you can see why that's pretty important. And why, during a pandemic, people don't have wills. Well, they might know something that I don't. God bless.